Chapter 23, page 1. Functions of the respiratory system. Movement of air and gas exchange, protection, filter, warm, humidify, sound production, and olfaction. Organization, respiratory tract. The conducting portion of the respiratory tract brings air to the gas exchange surface. The conducting portion is the respiratory tract minus alveoli and terminal branches. Respiratory portion. This is the gas exchange region. It includes alveoli and terminal bronchioles. Respiratory mucosa. This is the epithelial layer plus the lamina propria. The goblet cells within the respiratory mucosa produce mucus and catch debris. Also within the respiratory mucosa, the pseudostratified ciliated epithelia sweep mucus away. Upper respiratory system. A. Nose. 1. External nares, also known as the nostrils. These are the openings that bring air into the vestibule. 2. Nasal vestibule. Within the nasal vestibule are hairs to trap debris. B. Nasal cavity. This is a chamber bound by internal and external nares. 1. Nasal septum. The nasal septum separates the cavity. Page 2. Nasal conchae. This warms and humidifies air. It is the site of olfaction. Internal nares. These are the openings to the throat, also known as the nasopharynx. C. Pharynx. This is a tube from the nasal cavity to the larynx and esophagus. Lower respiratory system. A. Larynx. This is the cartilaginous voice box. 1. Cartilages. A. Thyroid cartilage. This is the largest structural support. B. Cricoid cartilage. This is the smaller structural support. C. Corniculate and arytenoid cartilages. These are very small and open and close the glottis. 2. Glottis. This is the space between vocal folds or the opening into the trachea. A. Vocal folds or cords. These are elastic tissues that vibrate and produce sound. Pitch depends upon length and tension. 3. Epiglottis. These are the cartilaginous folds over the glottis. It prevents the entry of food and liquid into the respiratory system. B. Trachea, also known as the windpipe. This is the tube that connects the larynx and the lungs. It has C-shaped tracheal cartilages. The trachealis muscle controls the diameter. C. Primary bronchi. These are the left and right branches of the trachea. They branch into each lung, so a small part is outside of the lung or extrapulmonary. Intrapulmonary means inside the lung. Page 3. D. Lungs. These are the organs of respiration. The right has 3 lobes and the left has 2 lobes. E. Secondary bronchi. These form as the primary bronchi divide. There is less cartilage than in primary bronchi and more smooth muscle than in primary bronchi. F. Tertiary bronchi. These form as the secondary bronchi divide. There is less cartilage than in secondary bronchi and more smooth muscle. G. Bronchioles. These form as the tertiary bronchi divide. There is a lot of smooth muscle which controls the diameter. Terminal bronchioles. These form as bronchioles divide. They deliver air to the pulmonary lobule. H. Pulmonary lobule. This has arteries, veins, and connective tissue. It is very elastic. 1. Respiratory bronchioles. These form as terminal bronchioles branch and deliver air to alveoli via a duct. 2. Alveolar sacs. These are chambers at the end of a duct with alveoli. 3. Alveoli. These are highly vascularized blind pockets. A. Pneumocytes type 1. These are for gas diffusion. They are simple squamous cells. B. Pneumocytes type 2. These produce surfactant, which is not a lubricant. Surfactant reduces surface tension and prevents alveolar collapse. C. Macrophages. These protect against pathogens. 4. Alveolar membrane. This is the site of gas exchange. It is a thin membrane which allows for rapid diffusion. Page 4. Pleural cavity. A. The parietal pleura. This is the outer lining of the pleural cavity. It covers the thoracic cavity. B. Visceral pleura. This is the inner lining of the pleural cavity. It covers the lungs. C. Pleural cavity. This is the space between the parietal pleura and the visceral pleura. It contains pleural fluid to reduce friction. Airflow into lungs. A. Pressure and volume. Atmospheric pressure equals 760 mmHg at sea level. Gas has a lower density than liquid because molecules are farther apart. 1. Boyle's law. This states that pressure and volume are inversely proportional, and the equation is P equals 1 over V. A decrease in volume will lead to an increase in molecular collisions and an increase in pressure. An increase in volume will lead to a decrease in molecular collisions and a decrease in pressure. B. Pressure changes in airflow. Air moves from high pressure to low pressure. 1. Inhalation. This is an active process. A. Diaphragm. This contracts, moves down, and there is an increase in the volume of the thoracic cavity. Intrapulmonary pressure decreases to 759 mmHg and air moves in. B. External intercostals. These contract, the ribcage moves up, and thoracic cavity volume increases. When intrapulmonary pressure drops, air moves in. 2. Exhalation. This is a passive process. A. Elastic rebound. The lungs contain a lot of elastic tissue. Muscles relax, lungs rebound. Air moves out. B. Intrapleural pressure. This is negative pressure between the pleurae. Page 5. Elastic fibers pull, fluid bond resists. This wets the sides so they can slide, but they don't come apart. Trauma can introduce air into the thoracic cavity. This is called pneumothorax. An increase in pressure may cause lung collapse. The word for lung collapse is atelectasis. 3. Compliance. This is how easily the lungs expand. It's the elasticity. A decrease in compliance will lead to an increase in the force needed to fill the lungs, like a balloon. An increase in compliance will lead to a decrease in the force needed to fill the lungs. Gas exchange. A. Gas laws. 1. Dalton's law. Each gas contributes to the total pressure in proportion to abundance. Air is 78.6% nitrogen, 20.9% oxygen, etc. A. Partial pressure. This is the pressure contributed by a single gas in a mixture. The pressure of nitrogen plus the pressure of oxygen plus the pressure of carbon dioxide plus the pressure of water is 760 mmHg at sea level. The pressure of oxygen is 0.209 out of 760 mmHg, which is 159 mmHg. 2. Henry's law. At a given temperature, the amount of gas in a solution is proportional to the partial pressure of a gas. An increase in partial pressure of a gas will lead to more gas going into the solution. A decrease in the partial pressure of a gas will lead to less gas going into the solution. B. Gas exchange. Its efficiency is due to small diffusion distance and a large surface area and partial pressures which favor diffusion. 1. Partial pressures in the pulmonary circuit, O2 or air, blood, CO2, blood to air. 2. PPs in the systemic circuit, O2 of blood to interstitial fluid, carbon dioxide of interstitial fluid to blood. C. Gas pickup and delivery. 1. Oxygen transport. Red blood cells contain hemoglobin, which has 4 protein/heme plus iron groups. Each iron binds to one oxygen. Hemoglobin changes shape. This affects O2 binding. A. Factors affecting Hb saturation. An increase in the pressure of oxygen and an increase in pH or a decrease in temperature will lead to an increase in oxygen binding and an increase in hemoglobin saturation. And the same works in reverse. Page 6. Carbon dioxide transport. 30% of carbon dioxide transport moves to plasma or binds to hemoglobin. 70% of carbon dioxide forms carbonic acid, HC2O3, by binding to water. Hydrogen binds hemoglobin. HCO3 moves out of red blood cells into plasma in a chloride shift. The last point is the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system. Respiratory volumes. The lungs are divided into volumes or capacities. Clinical evaluation is done with a spirometer. A. Tidal volume, VT. This is the volume into and out of lungs in a single respiratory cycle. Typically, this will be around 500 ml. Respiratory rate, F. This is the number of breaths per minute. C. Respiratory minute volume, abbreviated VE. This is the volume into and out of the lungs per minute. The equation is F times VT, or the respiratory rate times the tidal volume. D. Expiratory reserve volume, abbreviated ERV. This is the volume in the lungs that you can expel after a normal exhalation. E. Residual volume, abbreviated RV. This is the volume remaining following max exhalation. F. Inspiratory reserve volume, abbreviated IRV. This is the volume that is taken in over tidal volume, or you breathe in as much air as possible following a normal inhalation. G. Inspiratory capacity, abbreviated IC. This is the volume drawn into the lungs following a quiet respiratory cycle. The equation for IC is IRV plus VT, or inspiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume. H. Functional residual capacity, abbreviated FRC. This is the volume in the lungs following a quiet respiratory cycle. The equation for FRC is ERV plus RV, or expiratory reserve volume plus residual volume. I. Vital capacity, abbreviated VC. This is the max volume of air moved in and out of the lungs in a single respiratory cycle. The equation for vital capacity is ERV plus VT plus IRV. So vital capacity equals expiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume. J. Total lung capacity, abbreviated TLC. This is the total volume of the lungs. The equation for TLC is VC plus RV, or vital capacity plus residual volume.